account payable. From last few sections, we were performing all the transactions which are related to account receivable or sundry debitors. But in this section, we will look into the business transactions which are actually related to account payable. Account payable refers to the money owed by a business to its suppliers or vendors for the goods or the services availed. Sometimes the account payable GL account is also called as sundry creditors. What it is called? It is called as sundry creditors. If the company has payables, what does it mean? It means the company has procured materials or the services from the vendor but have not yet made the payment to the vendor. Just like the account receivable process, the account payable process is of two types. Yes, it is of two types. The first type is financial accounting process and the second type is material management process. In FI process, we generate the vendor invoice without reference to material procured. But in case of process, we generate the vendor invoice as per the P2P process, that is procure to pay process. The vendor used for P2P process are called as core vendors. What they are called as? They are called as core vendors. And the vendors used for FI process are called as non-core vendors. Got it? Let me give you an example as to where we use this core vendor process and non-core vendor process respectively. The first example, here let's consider the Lenovo company that assembles the laptop. So, to build the laptop, the Lenovo company requires the processor. And this processor will be procured from the Intel company. In other words, we can see that Lenovo procures the raw material from Intel to build the final product as laptop. So guys, this is known as core vendor process or P2P process. Why? Because in this case, the vendor invoice and vendor payment posting will happen only against the goods receipt and invoice receipt from the vendor. And here, let's see another example wherein the Lenovo company has purchased the furniture for its office premises. In this case, what we do is we generate the vendor invoice from FI process, that is non-core vendor process. Collectively, what I can say is the core vendor is the vendor from whom the company purchases the raw materials, and vendor invoices are generated with a reference to goods receipt from vendor. So, in that case, we must have the raw material created in the material master and follow the procure to pay cycle process, and based on that only we create the vendor invoice. And guys, this is also known as process, that is material management process. In case of non-core vendor, we actually generate the vendor invoice without the reference to material received in SAP. Clear? Good. In SAP, based on the type of vendor, whether it is FI or the vendor creation process changes. Yes, the vendor creation process changes. So, for the FI vendors, that is non-core vendors, we use the T code, that is FK01. What is the T code which we will be using here? It is FK01. And for the creating of the vendors, that is the core vendors, we use the T code, that is MK01. While creating the vendor using the T code FK01, the system will ask us to create the vendor based on the account group and the company code. But when we are creating the vendor in the T code MK01, the system will ask us to create the vendor based on the purchase organization and the account group. There is one more T code in SAP, that is to create the vendor centrally. For that, we use the T code, that is XK01. With the use of this T code, we can actually create the vendor based on the company code and the purchase organization. So to summarize, to create the vendors in SAP, we have got 3 ways. Yes, we have got 3 ways. First way is using the T code FK01. We can create the FI vendor only with the company code. The second way is that using the T code MK01, wherein we create the MM vendor only with the purchase organization. Next comes the third way, that is using the T code XK01, that is create vendor centrally by using company code and the purchase organization. So this was about the vendor account creation process. And now let's look at the vendor purchase scenario, wherein the company purchases the product from the vendor in the credit and will make the payment at the later date to the vendor. So, when we are generating the vendor invoice, the journal entries will be vendor account credit and purchase account debit. What it is? It is vendor account credit and purchase account debit. After posting this journal entry, there will be open item create for vendor account. That means payment is due for the vendor from company. Now, when we make the payment to the vendor, we will post the outgoing payment document. Then, the journal entries in the payment document will be vendor account debit and bank account credit. So, the vendor account got credit in the first transaction and vendor account got debit when the vendor payment is made. And whenever we are posting any entry to vendor account apart from this vendor account, the system will make an entry in another account automatically. Yes, in another account automatically. That is accounts payable GL account. And guys, this is mandatory. Yes, it is very much mandatory. Just like account receivable process, we will link every vendor to accounts payable GL account. Got it? Yes. Guys, I hope you are now clear with the basic concepts related to accounts payable.